A man kneels in a small mosque in Damascus. His forehead touches the prayer rug. Around him, 17 men pray in perfect unison. He leads them through Fajr, the dawn prayer, his Arabic flowing like water. Every inflection carries the weight of someone who has lived these words his entire life. The morning call to prayer still echoes from the minaret outside. He recites from Surah Al-Fatiha, never stumbling, never hesitating. His hands move through the prescribed motions with the grace of deep practice. To anyone watching, he is exactly what he appears to be: a devout scholar, a spiritual guide, a man who has devoted his life to understanding the Quran. He is none of these things. The Mossad taught him those prayers. Every gesture was practiced in a training facility outside Tel Aviv. The men praying behind him are planning an attack that will kill hundreds of civilians in a marketplace. Women, children, people buying bread. And he has 72 hours to find out when and where. His name in this world is Sheikh Ibrahim. His real name is classified. He has been inside this cell for 8 months. 8 months of living a double life so deep that sometimes, in the moments between sleeping and waking, he forgets which person he really is. The prayer ends, the men rise. One of them, a thin man with a scar across his left cheek, approaches him. This man is the cell leader. His hands have built bombs. His orders have ended lives. He smiles at Sheikh Ibrahim with genuine warmth. "Your knowledge of hadith is remarkable, Sheikh," the scarred man says. "You interpret with such clarity." The agent returns the smile. Inside, his pulse hammers. Every conversation is a test. Every word a potential mistake that could end with a bullet in a basement. What he cannot show is that somewhere in a bunker beneath Jerusalem, 3 intelligence officers are listening to this conversation through a microphone no bigger than a grain of rice, embedded in his prayer beads. What he cannot reveal is that he has never believed in any God, that his family died in the Holocaust, that his grandfather's last words were in Yiddish. The scarred man invites him to breakfast. The agent accepts. They walk together into the Damascus morning. This is how deep cover works. This is how you stop an attack before it happens. This is the story of the operation that almost failed. 2 years earlier, the man who would become Sheikh Ibrahim was someone else entirely. He taught mathematics at a university in Haifa. He had a girlfriend. He played chess on Thursdays with his neighbor. His life was ordinary in every measurable way. Then Mossad came to his apartment on a Tuesday evening. 2 men in civilian clothes. They showed him photographs, his mother's family, cousins he had never met. They lived in Morocco, spoke fluent Arabic, looked Middle Eastern enough to pass. But that was not why they came. "You scored perfectly on the linguistic aptitude battery during your military service," the older of the 2 men said. "Your file says you learned conversational Arabic in 6 months." The younger man placed another photograph on the table, a mosque, a crowd, an explosion frozen in the moment before impact. "We need someone who can learn faster than that." The offer was simple, brutal in its simplicity. Train for 18 months, master Arabic at a native level, memorize the Quran, learn Islamic theology, jurisprudence, history, and cultural practice at a depth that would fool scholars, then disappear into Syria and find the people planning the next attack. The people in the photograph who never got to go home. He looked at the picture for a long time. Civilians buying vegetables, a child holding his mother's hand, frozen forever in the second before the world ended. "When do I start?" he asked. What came next was unlike any training program in intelligence history. Most deep cover operations give agents a few weeks, perhaps months, to build their legend. This required total transformation. He moved into a facility that did not exist on any map. His phone was confiscated. His girlfriend was told he had taken a position abroad. For the next 18 months, he would speak only Arabic, eat only halal food, wake for Fajr prayer before dawn, live as a devout Muslim every waking moment. The linguistic training was relentless. Native Arabic speakers from across the Middle East cycled through as instructors. They taught him not just the language, but the regional dialects: Syrian Arabic, Egyptian, Gulf, the way a Damascene scholar would phrase a question versus how a Cairo street preacher might say the same thing. They broke down his Hebrew accent syllable by syllable, rebuilt his vocal patterns from scratch, made him listen to recordings of his own voice until he could hear the microscopic tells that would mark him as foreign. But language was only the beginning. A former Imam, recruited by Mossad years earlier, taught him to pray, not just the words, but the feeling behind them. When you lead prayer, you are not performing, the Imam said. You are creating a sacred space. If they sense you are acting, they will know. The agent learned to recite the Quran from memory, all 114 surahs. He studied classical Arabic until he could parse the theological debates that divided Islamic scholars for centuries. He learned the difference between Sunni and Shia jurisprudence, memorized the Hadith collections, understood the historical context of every verse. Months passed. His hands developed calluses from the prayer rug. His internal clock adjusted to the 5 daily prayers. He stopped thinking in Hebrew, started dreaming in Arabic. The instructors tested him constantly. Pop quizzes on obscure hadith, theological debates in the middle of the night. Once, they brought in a Syrian scholar, told the agent nothing, and had him lead a discussion on Islamic philosophy. The scholar praised his insight afterward. He never knew he had been speaking to a Jewish intelligence officer. "You are ready for the language," his handler said after month 15. "Now comes the harder part." They taught him how to be someone else, not just speak like them, not just pray like them, but think like them, feel like them, become them so completely that the original person dissolved. He studied the psychology of belief, read accounts from undercover agents who had lived double lives for years, learned meditation techniques to compartmentalize, to shut off the part of his mind that remembered who he really was. They showed him videos of terrorist attacks, made him watch until he could discuss them analytically, without emotion, the way an intelligence operative must. But they also taught him something unexpected, to respect what he was imitating. Islam, his instructors explained, was a faith of peace perverted by violent men. The terrorists he would infiltrate did not represent Islamic teaching any more than a murderer wearing a cross, represented Christianity. The Quran spoke of mercy, justice, and the sanctity of human life. The men who built bombs and mosques were not Muslims in any meaningful sense. They were criminals, hiding behind religion. "If you do not respect the faith," the Imam told him, "you will never convince them you believe. You must understand what they have corrupted to see how they corrupted it." The agent read the Quran not as a script to memorize, but as a text to understand. He studied with genuine curiosity, found beauty in the poetry, meaning in the verses about compassion and mercy. By month 17, something had shifted. He was not converting. He did not believe, but he understood why others did. And that understanding made his performance deeper than any amount of practice could achieve. The final month was operational training, combat, surveillance, dead drops, how to communicate with handlers when every word might be monitored. They taught him to hide microphones and prayer beads, cameras in Quran covers, cyanide capsules, and false teeth. Showed him escape routes across the Syrian border, gave him 3 different extraction scenarios, and told him to memorize all of them because the one he would need could not be predicted. His legend was constructed with obsessive detail. Sheikh Ibrahim al-Mazari, born in a small village outside Homs, parents killed in the early years of the Syrian civil war, studied Islamic theology in Cairo, traveled through the Middle East seeking deeper understanding, apolitical, scholarly, gentle, someone a violent cell might see as useful but harmless. A spiritual advisor who could provide religious justification for their actions without asking too many questions. They built him a history, manufactured documents, created digital footprints going back years. Friends in Cairo who would vouch for him. All intelligence assets. A paper trail so detailed that even forensic investigation would confirm the story. On a cold morning in February, he crossed into Syria through a checkpoint controlled by rebel forces. He carried a worn backpack, a cheap phone, a handwritten Quran his handler had aged with tea stains and use. He wore simple clothes, looked tired, like a scholar who had been traveling for months. The rebels barely looked at his papers. In that moment, the mathematics teacher from Haifa, ceased to exist. Sheikh Ibrahim walked into Damascus alone. The first weeks were the most dangerous. He stayed in a small room above a bookstore, attended prayers at different mosques, spoke little, listened constantly. Violent extremists do not advertise their presence. They hide among ordinary worshippers, look like everyone else. The agent had to find them without revealing what he was searching for. He started teaching Quran study sessions for young men at a mosque in the old city, kept the lessons orthodox, never mentioned politics, never asked probing questions, just offered thoughtful interpretation of scripture. Word spread. Slowly, his Arabic was perfect, his knowledge genuine. People began seeking his counsel on religious matters. Should a merchant charge interest? What did this verse mean about charity? He answered with patience, built a reputation as a man of learning and humility. Then, after 6 weeks, someone new came to his study session. A man with a scar across his left cheek. He sat in the back, said nothing, just listened. When the session ended, he approached. "You interpret the verses on jihad with interesting nuance, Sheikh," the scarred man said. Every instinct in the agent's training screamed warning. This was the approach, the test, the moment that would determine if 18 months of preparation had been enough. "The Quran speaks of struggle," the agent replied carefully. "Inner struggle against sin, outer struggle against oppression. Context determines meaning." The scarred man smiled. "And if the context is occupation, foreign armies in Muslim lands, then one must consider what our Prophet, peace be upon him, would counsel. Defense of the innocent is sacred, but the taking of innocent life is forbidden, even in war." The answer was a tightrope, sympathetic enough to show he understood their grievance, orthodox enough to prove his religious credentials, careful enough to avoid endorsing violence explicitly. The scarred man studied his face for a long moment. "Perhaps we could discuss this further, Sheikh." Privately. The agent agreed. They set a meeting for the following evening. When the scarred man left, the agent walked calmly back to his room. Once inside, he placed his prayer beads on the windowsill, facing southeast. The signal. Contact made. In Jerusalem, his handlers received the message. The infiltration had begun. But what none of them knew yet was how deep this would go, how much the operation would demand, or how close the agent would come to losing himself entirely in the role he was playing. The scarred man was not just a contact. He led a cell, planning something larger than Tel Aviv had anticipated, something that would require the agent to do things his training never prepared him for. The next evening, they met in a basement beneath a rug shop. 3 other men were waiting. The agent recognized the setup immediately. This was not a friendly theological discussion. This was an interrogation. They offered him tea. He accepted, kept his hands steady, his face calm. Inside, his training took over. Suppress the fear. Become Sheikh Ibrahim completely. Leave no crack in the performance. "Tell us about your studies in Cairo," one of the men asked. For 2 hours they questioned him. Where had he studied? Who were his teachers? What texts had he read? They asked about obscure points of Islamic law, regional dialects, his family history. Every answer had to align with his legend. One contradiction, one moment of hesitation, and the performance would shatter. The agent spoke with quiet confidence, referenced scholars by name, quoted hadith from memory, described Cairo neighborhoods with the familiarity of someone who had lived there. The legend held. But then the scarred man asked a question that was not part of any theological test. "We have heard the Syrian regime tortures Muslim prisoners, uses chemical weapons against civilians. Do you believe armed resistance is justified, Sheikh?" The room went silent. The question was not about his knowledge. It was about his heart, about whether he could be trusted, whether he would give religious sanction to violence. The agent looked at each man in turn, let the silence stretch, then spoke carefully. "The Quran permits defense against oppression, but it also demands we protect the innocent. If resistance harms civilians, we risk becoming what we fight against. This is my struggle, to understand when defense becomes murder." The answer gave them what they wanted, acknowledgement that resistance could be justified, while maintaining enough moral complexity to seem genuine. He was not blindly endorsing their actions. He was a scholar wrestling with difficult questions, someone they could mold, someone they could use. The scarred man stood, extended his hand. "You are welcome among us, Sheikh Ibrahim. We need men who understand the faith, who can guide us in these difficult times." The agent shook his hand, felt the calluses, saw the fanaticism behind the smile. These were not men seeking spiritual guidance. They were killers looking for religious permission. And they had just invited him into their inner circle. As he walked back through the Damascus streets that night, the agent's hand shook for the first time since crossing the border. Not from fear, from the weight of what he had just done. He had passed their test, won their trust. Now came the hard part. Now he had to find out what they were planning and stop it before the marketplace filled with mourning shoppers became another photograph of frozen death. The scarred man's name was Khalid. He had killed his first person at 16 during the early chaos of the Syrian war. Now, at 32, he commanded a network of 17 operatives spread across Damascus. The agent learned this over the following weeks as trust built slowly, conversation by conversation. Khalid began inviting him to smaller gatherings, 5 or 6 men in safe houses, planning sessions disguised as prayer meetings. The agent sat quietly, offered religious perspective when asked, never pushed, never seemed too curious. What Khalid could not see was the microscopic camera embedded in the spine of the agent's Quran. Every face that appeared at these meetings was photographed. Every name mentioned was recorded. The intelligence flowed back to Tel Aviv through a system so secure even the agent did not fully understand how it worked. He would visit a specific market stall, buy dates. The merchant, a Mossad asset, would palm a small device no larger than a pill. The agent would swallow it. 12 hours later, his body would pass the device containing encrypted data. He would retrieve it, bury it in a predetermined location. Somewhere in the chain, others would collect it. The agent never saw them, never knew their names. This was deep cover at its most complete. He was alone in the operational sense. No backup team waiting around the corner. No extraction if things went wrong. Just the training and the legend and the absolute necessity of never breaking character. By the 3rd month, Khalid invited him to lead Friday prayers at a small mosque the cell controlled. This was both honor and test. Leading Jumu'ah meant delivering a khutbah, a sermon, in front of the entire community. The agent prepared for 3 days, studied how other imams structured their sermons, chose verses about patience and perseverance, avoided politics entirely. When Friday came, he stood before 80 worshippers and spoke for 20 minutes about the Prophet's mercy and the importance of protecting the weak. His voice never wavered. His Arabic flowed with the rhythm of someone who had given 1,000 such sermons. When he finished, men approached to thank him, to ask questions about faith, to seek his counsel on personal matters. Khalid watched from the back of the mosque. When the crowd cleared, he approached the agent. "You have a gift, Sheikh," Khalid said. "The people trust you. We need that trust." "I serve God, not agendas," the agent replied carefully. "Of course, but sometimes serving God means supporting those who fight for his justice." The conversation was gentle, almost friendly, but underneath was the question Khalid had been building toward for months. Would Sheikh Ibrahim support their operations? Would he give religious blessing to what they planned? The agent knew he had to give ground. Too much resistance and they would doubt his commitment, but too much enthusiasm and he would lose the moral authority that made him useful to them. He needed to be a reluctant ally, someone whose faith made him valuable, but whose conscience kept him from the actual violence. "Tell me what you are planning," the agent said quietly, "and I will tell you what the Quran permits." That night, in a basement beneath a medical clinic, Khalid spread maps across a table. The other cell leaders gathered, and for the first time, the agent saw the scope of what they intended. A coordinated attack, 3 locations simultaneously, a marketplace, a government building, a checkpoint where regime soldiers screened civilians. The plan was designed for maximum civilian casualties. The marketplace alone would kill hundreds, women, children, the elderly buying groceries. The attack was scheduled for a Friday morning in 6 weeks. the height of shopping season before Eid. The agent looked at the maps, kept his face neutral. Inside, his mind was racing. This was worse than Tel Aviv had feared. The intelligence suggested a single target, maybe 20 casualties. This was mass. Murder, 3 bombs, hundreds dead. "You want my blessing for this?" he asked. "We want your understanding," Khalid said. "The regime uses these spaces. Military families shop there. Government workers eat there. They are not innocent. Neither are the children who will die beside them." The room went tense. The other men looked at Khalid, questioning whether bringing the sheikh into their confidence had been a mistake. But Khalid remained calm. "This is why we need you, Sheikh Ibrahim, to help us walk the line between justice and murder, to ensure we honor the faith even in war." It was manipulation. Transparent manipulation. They wanted him to give religious cover to an attack they had already decided to launch. But the agent saw his opening. If he condemned them outright, they would shut him out or kill him. If he endorsed them, he became complicit. But if he engaged with their plans, asked questions, raised concerns, he could delay them, gather more intelligence, give Tel Aviv time to act. "Let me study this," he said. "Give me time to consult the texts. This is not a decision to make in haste." Khalid smiled. "Of course, Sheikh. Take the time you need. But understand, the operation moves forward with or without your blessing." The agent returned to his room that night, carrying the weight of hundreds of lives. He had the targets, the timing, the method, everything Tel Aviv needed to stop the attack. But extracting himself to pass the intelligence meant abandoning his position inside the cell. And there might be details he still did not know. Backup plans, secondary cells. If he left now, they might scatter, change their approach, strike somewhere else. He placed his prayer beads on the windowsill in a specific pattern: emergency signal, urgent intelligence. Within 2 days, his handler would make contact. But 2 days was a long time when the clock was counting down to mass murder. What the agent could not know was that in Jerusalem, his signal had triggered an immediate crisis. The Mossad leadership now faced an impossible decision: extract him and risk losing the cell, or leave him in place and risk his exposure. The argument raged through the night. Some wanted to pull him out immediately, use the intelligence to stop the attack through other means. Others argued he was too valuable, too deep, that pulling him would compromise future operations. In the end, they decided to leave him in place. The order came back through the same market stall, same swallowed pill. The message was brief: continue, gather secondary targeting, extraction on your signal. The agent read it, destroyed the device, and understood what they were asking. Stay inside. Keep playing the role. Find out if there were more attacks planned, more cells waiting. He was being asked to walk deeper into the fire. The following weeks tested everything his training had built. Khalid invited him to more planning sessions, asked him to meet with individual cell members, to counsel them, to help them understand that what they were doing was righteous. The agent played the part, spoke about jihad in the abstract, about the importance of intention, about ensuring that violence served a higher purpose. He never explicitly endorsed the attack, but he never condemned it either. He walked the impossible line between complicity and resistance. But there was a problem developing that the training had not prepared him for. He was starting to understand them, not agree with them, not sympathize with their methods, but understand the path that had led them here. Khalid had watched his brother die in a regime barrel bombing, saw his neighborhood destroyed, his family scattered. The other men had similar stories, trauma layered on trauma until violence seemed like the only language left. They were wrong, monstrously wrong. The marketplace they planned to bomb held people as innocent as Khalid's brother, but the agent saw how they had arrived at this point, how grief and rage and religious manipulation had twisted them into killers. This understanding complicated everything. It made the deception harder, made the performance feel less like acting and more like betrayal. He was not just lying to strangers. He was lying to people who had welcomed him, who trusted him, who sought his guidance. The fact that they were planning mass murder did not erase the human connection. One night, after leading evening prayer, a young cell member approached him. barely 20 years old, nervous, seeking counsel. "Sheikh Ibrahim, I am afraid," the young man said, "of what we are planning, of dying, of judgment." The agent could have reassured him, could have played the role Khalid wanted, given religious blessing that would calm the young man's conscience. Instead, he spoke carefully. "Fear is wisdom. It means you understand the gravity. The Quran speaks of accountability, of weighing our deeds. If you have doubt, you must examine it. But Khalid says doubt is weakness. That hesitation betrays the cause. Khalid is not God, and causes do not absolve us of moral responsibility." The conversation lasted an hour. The agent never told the young man to leave the cell, never explicitly tried to turn him, but he planted questions, seeds of doubt. It was not mercy, it was operational. If one cell member began to waver, it created instability, mistrust, operational delays. Every day he could slow them was another day for Tel Aviv to act. But the young man's fear stayed with the agent. That night, lying on his thin mattress, he thought about the marketplace, about the families who would be there, about the young man's question, about judgment. He did not believe in God, did not fear divine accountability, but he believed in the weight of choices. And the choice he was making, to stay embedded, to keep deceiving, to delay rather than prevent, felt heavier with each passing day. What he could not see was that in Tel Aviv, planners were developing an operation to stop the attack without compromising his cover, a surgical strike, precision intelligence. They would neutralize the cell the night before the bombing, make it look like routine regime security sweeps. The agent would be arrested along with the others, held for 72 hours, released when his legend checked out. He would be a victim, not a suspect, his cover intact for future operations. It was a good plan, a smart plan, but it required perfect timing and perfect intelligence, which meant the agent had to stay close to Khalid, had to know the exact timing, the exact locations, the names of every operative involved. 3 weeks before the scheduled attack, Khalid took him to meet the bomb maker. This was the deepest level of trust. Operational security dictated that cell members know only what they needed. The bomb maker was kept isolated, unknown to most of the network. The agent had been asking careful questions about the technical details, framing it as religious concern. If the bombs were too large, collateral damage would be excessive. If too small, the operation would fail. He needed to understand the weapons to judge their morality. Khalid bought the argument, or pretended to. Either way, he brought the agent to a warehouse in the industrial district. Inside, a middle-aged man worked at a table covered in electronics and chemicals. The agent's training kicked in immediately, photographing everything with his eyes, noting the components, the configurations, the safety measures or lack thereof. "This is our engineer," Khalid said. "He studied in university before the war." The bomb maker barely looked up. He was consumed by his work, adjusting wires, testing circuits. The agent watched him work, asked technical questions framed as theological ones. How certain was the detonation? What was the expected radius? Would it distinguish between military and civilian? The bomb maker finally looked at him. "You are asking if I can build a moral bomb, Sheikh. I am asking if you understand what you are building. I understand perfectly. I am building justice, or revenge, or martyrdom. Choose whichever word helps you sleep." The coldness was startling. This man had no illusions, no religious justification. He was building weapons because something inside him had broken, because the only way he knew to respond to his pain was to create more of it. The agent left that meeting shaken, reported the location, the components, the technical specifications that would help Tel Aviv's bomb disposal teams. But he also reported something else, that this cell was not driven by religious fervor. It was driven by trauma, which made them more dangerous. Fanatics could be reasoned with, manipulated through theology. But broken men had nothing left to lose. 2 weeks remained. The agent maintained his routine, led prayers, counseled cell members, played the role. But the strain was beginning to show in ways his handlers could not see. He stopped sleeping well, started forgetting to eat. The double life was consuming him. Sheikh Ibrahim and the mathematics teacher were bleeding together, creating a third person who was neither. someone lost in the space between identities. Then, with 10 days left, everything almost collapsed. A regime intelligence officer attended Friday prayers, sat in the back, watched the agent deliver his sermon. When prayers ended, the officer approached. "Sheikh Ibrahim, I would like to speak with you, privately." Khalid saw the approach from across the mosque. His hand moved toward his jacket, where the agent knew he carried a pistol. The next 60 seconds would determine if the operation survived. If the agent survived. The agent walked toward the regime officer with measured steps. Behind him, he could feel Khalid's tension, could sense the calculations happening. If this was an arrest, Khalid would try to intervene. Gunfire in a mosque, civilian casualties, everything spiraling into chaos. The agent raised his hand slightly, a gesture only Khalid would understand. "Stand down, let me handle this." The officer was young, maybe 25, wore civilian clothes but carried himself with military bearing. He gestured toward the mosque courtyard, away from listening ears. The agent followed. Every training instinct screamed to run through scenarios, escape routes, cover stories, ways to salvage the operation if this went wrong. They stopped near the fountain. The officer spoke quietly. "Your sermons have been reported to us, Sheikh. Someone believes you may be radicalizing young men." The agent's heart rate stayed controlled. This was a fishing expedition, not an arrest. The officer was following a lead, testing, probing. The response had to be perfect. "I teach only from the Quran," the agent said. "If someone hears radicalism in the Prophet's words about mercy and justice, perhaps they should examine their own heart." The officer studied his face. "You are not Syrian. Your accent places you from elsewhere." "I was born near Homs, studied in Cairo. My accent reflects my education, not my loyalty." "And your papers?" The agent produced his identification, the forged documents Tel Aviv had spent months perfecting. The officer examined them, pulled out a phone, made a call, spoke in his codes the agent could not decipher. Minutes stretched like hours. From across the courtyard, Khalid watched, hand still near his weapon. Finally, the officer returned the papers. "Your documents verify, but I will be watching your sermon, Sheikh. The regime has no tolerance for those who inspire violence against the state. And I have no interest in politics, only in guiding souls toward God." The officer left. The agent stood by the fountain for 3 full minutes, letting his heart rate settle, processing what had just happened. When he returned to the mosque, Khalid pulled him aside. What did he want? To intimidate me, to see if I would break. I did not break. Khalid studied him, then nodded. "You have courage, Sheikh. Not many could face regime interrogation without fear showing." But fear had shown. The agent knew it. The officer had seen something. Maybe not enough to act on, but enough to remember, enough to watch. The encounter had put him on a list somewhere, made him visible, and visibility in deep cover was a death sentence waiting to happen. He sent another signal that night. Different pattern, compromised. The response came within hours. Maintain position, extraction in 72 hours post-operation, do not deviate. They were leaving him in, even knowing he had been flagged, even knowing the risk had multiplied, because the attack was 9 days away and they needed every piece of intelligence, every detail that could help stop it cleanly. The agent understood the calculation. He was expendable. The mission was not. Hundreds of lives in that marketplace weighed more than one operative. It was the right call, but that did not make it easier to accept. The final week moved like a fever dream. Khalid held daily meetings, went over the plan obsessively, changed small details, adjusted timing. The agent absorbed everything: the 3 teams, the synchronization, the escape routes, the backup plans if something went wrong. He memorized it all, passed it through the dead drop system, knew that somewhere in Jerusalem, military planners were building their counterstrike around his intelligence. 3 days before the attack, the young cell member who had expressed doubt disappeared. The agent asked Khalid what happened. He was having second thoughts, Khalid said simply. We could not risk him compromising the operation. The agent did not ask what that meant, did not need to. The young man was dead, killed by his own people because doubt made him a liability. The agent had planted those doubts, had tried to save him by making him question. Instead, he had signed the young man's death warrant. That night, alone in his room, the agent broke protocol, sat with his head in his hands, let himself feel the weight. He had not pulled the trigger, but his words had led to it. This was the cost his training had warned about, the price of deep cover. You could not save everyone. Sometimes trying to save one person meant condemning them. He thought about extraction, about walking away, letting Tel Aviv handle it without him. But he was too deep now, too close. If he disappeared, Khalid would know something was wrong, would change the plans, scatter the cell. The attack might still happen, just differently, somewhere else. The intelligence would be worthless. So, he stayed, led prayers, counseled the remaining cell members, played Sheikh Ibrahim while the mathematics teacher screamed inside him to run. 2 days before the attack, Khalid took him to see the final preparations. The bombs were complete, 3 devices, each powerful enough to level a city block. The agent looked at them, felt sick. These were not abstract threats, not intelligence reports. These were real weapons that would tear through real flesh in 48 hours. Beautiful, are they not? The bomb maker said. Perfect in their simplicity. The agent said nothing, could not trust his voice. That night, he sent his final intelligence dump. Everything. The exact locations of the bombs, the timing sequence, the cell members' positions, the escape routes, the backup plans. Every detail that would allow Israeli intelligence to coordinate with Allied services, to stop this without his continued presence. The response came back final and absolute. Operation Greenlit, your extraction 2200 hours night of, maintain cover until signal. 2200 hours, 10 at night. The attack was scheduled for 9 in the morning. He had to stay in character for 13 more hours after the bombs were supposed to detonate. Pretend to be shocked, horrified. Play the grief-stricken Imam whose spiritual guidance had failed to prevent tragedy. Even though he would know the bombs had been found, the cell neutralized, the marketplace safe. The day before the attack, Khalid gathered the entire cell, 17 men. They prayed together. The agent led them, recited verses about sacrifice and paradise, about standing firm in the face of adversity. His voice never wavered. He had become Sheikh Ibrahim so completely that the performance required no effort. The words flowed automatically. He had stopped thinking about what he was saying, just spoke, just performed, just survived. After prayers, Khalid embraced him. Whatever happens tomorrow, Sheikh, know that you helped guide us. Your wisdom gave us the strength to act. The agent returned the embrace, felt the man's conviction, his certainty that mass murder was righteous, and felt nothing. The empathy that had complicated his mission weeks ago was gone, burned away by the strain, by the young man's death, by the bombs sitting in a warehouse, waiting to kill children. He was hollow now, just a shell playing a role. That night, he did not sleep, sat on his floor, waited for dawn, wondered if the operation would succeed, if Israeli intelligence had moved fast enough, if the coordination was perfect, if something had been missed, a backup bomb, a secondary cell, a contingency plan he had not uncovered. At 5 in the morning, his cheap phone buzzed, a text from a number he did not recognize, 3 words in Arabic. The market opens. It was the code. The operation was in motion. Somewhere in Damascus, special forces were moving. Regime security services, tipped off by Allied intelligence, were raiding safe houses. The bombs were being located and neutralized. The cell was being rolled up, and he had to act like he knew nothing. He dressed, went to morning prayers at the mosque, led Fajr like any other day. Khalid was not there. None of the cell leaders were there, just ordinary worshippers, people who had no idea how close. They had come to losing everything. At 8:30, news began spreading. Arrests across Damascus, a terror cell dismantled. Government officials praising their security services for preventing a massacre. The regime taking credit for an operation they barely understood. The agent acted shocked, asked questions, expressed concern for Khalid and the others, played the innocent Imam, whose congregation had been infiltrated by extremists without his knowledge. Other worshippers comforted him. told him it was not his fault, that he could not have known. But what they could not see was the calculations running through his mind. Khalid had been arrested, so had the bomb maker. 12 of the 17 cell members in custody, but 5 were missing, either escaped or never located. 5 men with training and motivation and hatred. 5 men who could rebuild, strike later, continue the violence. The operation had succeeded. The immediate threat was stopped, but the war was not over. It would never be over. At 2200 hours that night, the agent walked to a specific street corner. A car pulled up. Regime plates. The driver was Mossad. They drove in silence to the border, crossed through a checkpoint controlled by assets. By midnight, he was in Israeli territory. His handlers met him at a safe house, offered food, medical evaluation, debriefing. He refused everything except water, sat in silence for an hour. They did not push. Understood that he needed time, that 18 months undercover plus 8 months embedded had broken something that could not be quickly repaired. Finally, he spoke. The 5 who escaped. What happens to them? We are tracking them. Operations are ongoing. And Khalid? Syrian custody. He will likely be executed. The agent nodded, felt nothing. Khalid was a murderer, a fanatic, a man who had planned to kill hundreds. But he was also a man who had welcomed Sheikh Ibrahim, who had trusted him, who had died not knowing that the spiritual advisor he embraced was the one who betrayed him. The mathematics teacher would have felt guilt. Sheikh Ibrahim would have felt righteous. The person sitting in that safe house felt nothing at all. The debriefing took 3 weeks. Every conversation, every detail, every intelligence thread that might lead to other cells, other operations. The agent provided it all mechanically, professional, thorough, emotionally absent. The psychologist watched him carefully, recommended extended leave, treatment for what they carefully did not call trauma, but everyone understood was happening. He refused, requested reassignment, wanted back in the field. They denied it, told him he needed time. That deep cover operations like this required recovery, that pushing through would compromise future effectiveness. He argued, they insisted. Finally, they compromised. He would take 6 months, work a desk job, see the psychologist weekly, then they would reevaluate. 6 months turned into a year. The desk. Job felt like prison. He was fluent in Arabic, expert in Islamic theology, trained for operations that required total transformation. And they had him analyzing signals intelligence reports. He requested transfer. They said not yet. Said he was not ready. Said the psychological evaluations showed concerning patterns. Eventually, he stopped asking, stopped attending the sessions, stopped caring. He left Mossad after 18 months, returned to teaching, not mathematics. He could not go back to that person. Instead, he taught Arabic language and Middle Eastern studies at a small college. His students knew him as intense, demanding, someone who insisted on perfect pronunciation and deep cultural understanding. They did not know why. He never spoke about the operation, not to colleagues, not to friends, not to the women he dated briefly before they left, frustrated by his emotional unavailability. The only people who knew were the handlers, and they had moved on to other operations, other agents, other crises. Years later, he read a news report about Syrian refugees, saw a photograph of a Damascus marketplace, not the one he had saved, a different one, destroyed in a later attack, women and children in the rubble. He stared at the photo for a long time, thought about the young cell member who had expressed doubt, about Khalid's conviction, about the bombs that had been stopped and the bombs that had not. The operation was classified a success. 17 arrests, 3 bombs neutralized, hundreds of lives saved, an intelligence coup that provided actionable data for years afterward. The after-action report praised the agent's performance, recommended he receive commendation. He declined it, did not want recognition for becoming someone he could never fully stop being, because that was the cost they never explained in training, that Sheikh Ibrahim did not die when the operation ended. He lived somewhere in the agent's mind, a ghost who knew the Quran by heart, who had led prayers with genuine feeling, who had understood, for just a moment, why faith mattered to people. The mathematics teacher had been buried so deep that he never fully resurrected. What came back was a third person, someone in between, someone who could recite verses about mercy while remembering how he had used them to deceive. The operation stopped one attack, saved hundreds of lives, gave intelligence agencies insights into extremist networks that prevented future violence. By every objective measure, it was worth it. The cost was acceptable. One agent's psychological damage weighed against hundreds of families who never knew how close they came to losing everything. But acceptable cost and zero cost are different things. The man who had been a mathematics teacher, who had studied to become Sheikh Ibrahim, who had lived for 8 months as someone else. He paid a price that could not be measured in intelligence reports or lives saved. He paid it in the pieces of himself he left in that Damascus mosque, in the prayers he still sometimes whispered in his sleep, in the way he could never again be certain who he really was. This is what deep cover demands, not just your time, not just your risk, but your identity itself. The operation succeeded because he became the role so completely that it stopped being a role. And when you become someone else, that thoroughly coming back is not guaranteed. Some part of you stays in character forever, walking through a life that no longer quite fits, haunted by the person you pretended to be. The marketplace in Damascus opens every morning. Families buy bread, children hold their parents' hands. They do not know about the bombs that did not detonate, about the cell that was stopped, about the operation that saved them. They just live, go about their days, exist in the peace that intelligence work creates invisibly. Somewhere, the man who was Sheikh Ibrahim teaches Arabic to college students, leads a quiet life, appears normal to anyone who meets him. And late at night, when sleep will not come, he thinks about Khalid, about the young man who doubted, about the price of stopping evil when stopping it requires becoming part of it, about whether the person he became to save those lives was worth the person he stopped being. The answer should be simple. Hundreds of lives matter more than one identity. The mathematics is clear, but mathematics cannot measure what it costs to pray with conviction to a God you do not believe in, to embrace killers as brothers, to become someone so completely that you forget how to be yourself. If this exposed the invisible calculations behind intelligence work, subscribe. The next operation goes deeper into the machinery we never see, the operations that succeed because someone was willing to lose themselves to save others, the prices we never count because counting them would make the work impossible. Here is what haunts me about this story. The agent did everything right, followed every protocol, saved hundreds of lives, completed the mission perfectly, and still paid a cost that broke something unfixable. So, here is the question. When the operation demands you become the enemy to stop them, when you have to pray their prayers and speak their words and live their life until you cannot remember which thoughts are yours and which are the characters, when success means losing yourself so completely that coming back means living as a stranger in your own skin, when all of that is the price of saving lives, is there a number high enough, a threat grave enough, a mission critical enough to justify what it costs the person who pays it? What do you think? Comments below.